good. Before we do that, let's just talk about the fact that we're doing Zoom today, as well as having an in-person meeting. We're doing this as sort of a hybrid type of a situation. The movement right now is to bring everything in person from going forward. So those of you who are viewing this at home on your computer, this probably isn't going to continue into September unless something happens. Of course, that's obviously outside of our control. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood. We wanted to do a little bit of a couple of the hybrids, even though we've been directed to have all these meetings in person. So just be aware of that. And future meetings, at least as of right now, are all going to be in person in the Zoom aspect, which is caused some problems. We're going to talk about some of those today. It's a good thing and a bad thing. Technology always has two sides. So starting in September, don't expect to pick us up on the internet unless something happens. We can go, depending on the governor and all the rest of that. We all understand this terrible pandemic we've been through and the problems that it's caused. All right, so let's go to continuances and modifications. Mr. Asio.
Yeah, item number 8 on the agenda, West Main Solar 1 LLC, is going to be continued due to lack of advertisement for a design review board meeting. That was supposed to happen I believe on the 2nd. And then number 9, Namali Power RI LLC is seeking continuance to the next one.
And that's because they haven't got anything.
Yeah, I just believe they have
So both
highly.
of the applicants are requesting.
Well, it was the opinion of the town planner and the solicitor that because West Main Solar 1 did not have the design review board hearing prior to the planning board hearing, that they should be continued.
So let's deal them one at a time. Number 8, what's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion that we pick this up at the next September meeting. At 9, 8.
Is there a second? Second. Is there any discussion?
One discussion. Number 7 and 8, what's the difference? Next approval, preliminary plan application.
Good point. It's the same as.
Yeah.
Are they the same?
No, so number 7 is to approve the master plan decision.
Ah, that's right. So we'll deal with one at a time. Number 8. Any other discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. Motion carries. Number 9. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion that we allow this to be brought up at the next September 9th meeting as well. September 8th.
We have enough problems. Yeah, I don't want to hear anything. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Anything else we need to address, Mr. Casio?
There were 2 items that were on the last agenda that were continued that weren't placed on this agenda. One was the Twin Club minor subdivision, and the other, I believe, was P&G Realty. It was a plan unit development for retail service plan unit development.
That was the one with the waterfront water. And they're not on this calendar, so you can't add them on.
We became aware of them after the within the 48 hours.
I know you want to speak to this. Only a simple mistake. I just think they need to be re-advertised. So tonight, they're not here. Right. It's our mistake, and whatever we need to do is going to have to be done. And I just asked that we placed in the order of old business. We don't have an old business, new business. They don't allow anybody to do that in the state anymore. Order. Yeah, make sure that these guys are here earlier. So what do? I mean, they're not on the agenda, so we can't address them. Even though they're supposed to be.
I think you could address it just to continue it.
Okay. So is there, we're going to continue both of them to the 8th, right? So I think we do them both at the same time, or we have to do it separately? It's not an agenda item, so.
Continue.
Did you get that, get the refusal? So let's take them separately. So that we get this refusal. So the first one is Mike.
E&G Realty, it's 1200 West Main Road.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion that we do them again at the September 8th meeting, and that make sure that they are from the early part of the agenda.
There's a second.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The second one is Mike.
The Equipment Club, it's a minor subdivision that on Bristol Ferry Road in the.
Mr. Lopes has the recusal. Okay. What's the pleasure of the board?
Again, I'd like to make a motion that we move it to the September 8th meeting as well, and as well place it early on.
Is there a second? Second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. I'm sorry?
I just wanted to, the court mentioned that it has to be re-advertised. I'm not necessarily agreeing with that. The Open Meetings Act issue is separate from.
You talked to him.
That's true. Well, I'll talk to. Yeah, it's up to the town. Your petition, I didn't need notes. Your petition or the Equipment Club is on. Oh, your petition. Okay.
It's his.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk concern. I wasn't
You
sure.
talk to him,
Sure.
because whatever needs to be done, it's got to
Right.
be done. That's the way it is. All right, so we've cleaned up all the agenda. Let's go to item number 2. This is the minutes from our June 9 meeting and our July 14th meeting. If you remember, the June 9 meeting, we ended up having a technical problem with Zoom, which has created some of these issues. And the minutes we have in front of you, June 9, 2021, very short, less than a half a page. What's the pleasure of the board on those minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to accept what little minutes we have and place them on time.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item on the agenda are minutes from the July 14th meeting. And I think probably the first time I've seen minutes that have 15 pages. A long meeting. Very well typed. I think he deserves some kind of an award or something. Has everybody had the opportunity to?
The reason why she's here is she's sort of worn out.
Well, then that could be it. I think she needed a vacation. I think she needed people are entitled to that. Has everybody had an opportunity to review them? What's the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion. Our place in there, maybe. Accept the minutes as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? Record. Great job. 15 pages. You almost were.
Just one comment. June 9th, I was there, but I was with July 14th.
Let me get that. Yes.
You're here. Okay.
Members absent. Actually, we should change the June 9 instance. On the top, it says you were present, but then it mentions that you were absent. So your name should probably be from the first one. but it does mention the grass. So you're not, you put the vote on those minutes. Did you get all that? All right, there was a motion, there was a second.
Yep.
Is there any other discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote, all for the accepting the minutes as printed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, moving on to the next couple of items. These relate back to the June 9 meeting. Remember, we progressed through that meeting a little bit before we realized that our Zoom meeting was conflicting with the town council's Zoom meeting, where they were having a budgetary meeting, and that there were problems, there were technical problems, people were not able to contact us, and we basically had to abandon that meeting. So even though we've gone through these items already, we need to go through just so we're on the record. Wow. So the first item on the agenda, item number 3 on our agenda, is an application from Mark Moran. Elaine Blau, trustee, AP 67 lot 138, 273 Indian Avenue. This is a preliminary and final plan decision on 2-lot minor subdivision. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to put it out there that it went through with all the approvals, but if there was anybody that was not able to call in and speak up, it happens to be here, give them the opportunity.
Well, it's not, this is not open for public. It's our minutes on basically our decision, so we determine whether this is reflects our decision or doesn't. We don't take public.
Okay. So then we say that, like, make a motion and
Move it again.
approve it again, as it was written.
Last second. There's a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 4 is in that same category. This is the applicant owner is SEMA Holdings LLC. We're talking about AP 37 lot 2A. Is that zero?
Yeah.
Approving, it's an advisory opinion of the town council. That's industrial land, okay. Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, I'll continue to recuse myself. Did you get that? All right, what's the pleasure of the board? I make the motion.
Would be advisory. So we'll hold this.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item is item number 5. This is John Carlone and Margaret Carlone of Life Estate, AP 31, lot 4, 22 and 24th Street. Next street, this is an advisory opinion. Remember, they're doing anything on the back part of that forest property. What's the purpose?
Make a motion to approve the advisory opinion to town council.
Second. All right, have a discussion. Hearing none, call for the vote, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. Next. Is this from the last board meeting? Okay, this is applicant is West Shore, item number 6 on our agenda. West Shore Solar, Carnegie Trails LLC, AP 26 lot 13, 26 West Shore Road. Approval of the master plan decision for the development of a large scale solar project.
Chair, I'm going to continue my refusal on this application.
Everybody have a chance to review this? Anything you want to say, Mr. Chappelle?
Oh, thank you. I think it's,
I'm sorry?
I think it's all set. We're on.
So what's
Maybe
the
on
pleasure?
September agenda for preliminary. Problem file.
It's kind of a master. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make approval for master plan.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, call for vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, that's 6. 7 is West Main Solar, AP 44 lot 15, approved map plan decision. Did everybody have an opportunity to look at that?
I have recused myself.
Did you get that? Pardon?
Station.
Not sure.
Do you recall that you recused yourself in April?
April.
Right, I think this was from a meeting held in
It was last.
It would have been the May meeting, which would have been
May,
Since it came up, I was just. Not on the butter.
this is more over like Cindy's dying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was.
This is
So is it- I'm sorry. Yeah, and so this one here is also on Western Avenue. So if this is the one that is licensed, then I'm not.
Everybody, it's the pleasure of the board.
I'll make a motion to approve the master plans. Second.
Any further discussion?
Aaron, I guess I can take this one that doesn't need any more opportunity.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Guys, have. All right, next item, number 8.
Yes, I know, I didn't recuse.
He did not on this one. He didn't recuse himself on this.
100%.
Right.
You're not-
I just,
Yeah, don't,
I
if
just,
you're confused,
I did
you're
not-
not the only one.
I got back on it, and then when it came to voting aye, I did not vote aye.
6 eyes.
All right, moving along. Item number 8, and item number 9, we have,
I don't know, point of order.
you can ask a question, sure.
Last time they were in front of this board, it was a preliminary hearing. We have no knowledge of what you just approved.
I'm not sure, and
We have not seen a final plan.
you're not gonna see a final plan until they present a plan. This is just master plan.
What did you just approve?
We approved a decision for a master plan. So conceptual. So the detail of what's gonna be where comes up next.
Say that one more time.
It's a, yeah, I need to know your name and address for the record, I'm sorry. Thank you.
David Cross, 118 Sweet Farm Road.
Go ahead.
For clarity, I think a lot of people are here because it's on the agenda. The last time this applicant was in front of you was for a preliminary hearing. At that time, they set out some setbacks and some vegetative buffers, but nothing was finalized.
In terms of details beyond that?
Yes.
No.
So just for the public's perspective, and I would appreciate you just helping everyone understand exactly where we in this approval process. Is this the final approval of the planning?
This is the final approval of the concept.
Okay,
It's a three-step process.
and I'd ask for
Yeah,
your
I mean, explain.
patience with all of us,
I understand,
because,
I understand. That's
because
why-
you
that's why
represent
I'm-
us.
That's why I'm walking through it.
Thank you.
And the next thing is what's called preliminary. This is where, see, the thing is that the devil is in the details.
Absolutely.
And the details are expensive for the developer. It's not like just talking about solar.
Yeah.
Talking about everything. And so a person who's an applicant who wants to do a big project needs to know that conceptually this is something that can happen. Or they go out and hire engineers, and do all the studies, and come back with a plan where all of the detailed stuff is in. And that's the next step.
Thank you. I've learned not to move until you. This
Well, if somebody has a question, that's good. You're getting the drill.
I learned from it.
Anybody have any questions? No
I do.
Okay.
I was notified as in the letter that this would be taking place today. I don't know if I'm wasting my time here, because it seems like I'm not going to get to comment, or am I?
No, you're not wasting your time. But the next time you get a notice, you should definitely show up.
I
Because
thought
that's
the
gonna
time that I
be,
got this notice, I should show up.
yeah, I don't know what you got in terms of this notice. Go ahead.
This was probably, I mean, I'm missing something. This was probably noticed that they had just voted to continue. So there's not going to be another notice. They're here, that the matter was continued, so they're on notice that the matter's been continued to September. Right?
No,
This
we're
one.
talking about we're talking about number 7.
Oh, I thought we were talking about.
No, 8 and 9 are gone. They're next.
Several
Yeah, there's actually 2 different petitions, almost the same. One of them got continued. This was a different part of it.
Yeah, seven is just approval of the form of decision for the board.
It's hard enough to follow. It's hard enough to get people to come. It's hard enough to rearrange your night, and then to be told that just sit there, we're just gonna do this, you have nothing that is of value. It's discouraging.
Well, if you were involved in any of the next things, then you have every right to speak. What we just went through were cases where we have already heard the public and we have rendered a decision. And this is, the documents that we're going through are simply a reflection of the decision that we already made. So that was that. Now we're going to get into petitions where people are asking for relief. And we'll go from there. And if you have anything to do with these other applications, I think it's only 12 minutes. Whoever would like to speak and be participant. You have a question? Come on up, sir. Oh, by the way, I need your name and I'm remiss. Name and address.
Mark Roderick, 73 West Passage Drive.
Thank
And I'm here to spell 1.4 West Passage. So is it a foregone conclusion that the solar project is approved and is going to go in those localities, or is it?
In this particular case, yes. The next one.
So it's already been
The
approved?
next one, is ready. No, listen to the idea of it being able to go there. Go ahead.
That idea.
I think that we're talking about the master plan decision, which took place in May. That the decision is what they approved today. There was a notified hearing for the preliminary plan, which was supposed to take place today. And earlier in the meeting, they voted to continue it to the next month, so it's not going to be heard. So you'll all have time to comment when it's actually in front of the board, but that application is not going to be heard tonight. If that makes sense.
There's no meat and potatoes here tonight,
Okay.
and so you gotta wait for the next time, and then everybody has the chance to get up and.
Absolutely,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely. Okay. If you like meat and potatoes, if you're a vegetarian, I guess you listen to
Just
that.
potatoes.
Come on up. You know the drill, right?
I do. Good
Okay,
evening,
thank you.
Amy Stowe, 287 Vanderbilt Lane, Portsmouth. So just to clarify, I'm probably a little late to the party here, so I'm just jumping in on this issue, but, so do we have public hearings prior to each of these solar projects? So we do, okay. Are you asking for health and safety research studies to investigate the effects of electromagnetic radiation on residents and Portsmouth
Haven't heard that issue.
residents? Because that definitely will come up. So that might delay.
Then bring it up when we have the meeting.
I will, because that will delay those people. I'd like to see the health and safety reports on that and have them posted online for people. Just one more question, and I don't know if this is the appropriate venue for this. Is the town receiving any state or federal subsidies from putting in solar farms?
We get
Tax,
taxes.
this has already been continued.
Yeah, I understand.
Developers should be here and have an opportunity to,
No, they're just
Okay, I'm not-
asking general
like I said,
questions
I'm
about
to
the
not-
not
project.
get into the merits.
I'm not a
No, they're not
developer,
gonna
I'm
be there.
just a
Tell me
concerned
they can
citizen.
show up next time.
If it's not appropriate for me to ask. these
Yeah, I mean,
questions,
when you start getting into details, really, the developer has a right to be here. And actually, they got a lot more details in terms of responses to their project, because they know it backwards and
Okay, but
forwards.
I'm just not sure of the appropriate
Sure.
questions that we're allowed to ask. Maybe that should be written somewhere. Thank you.
I have an inappropriate question.
First off, you have to give us your name,
It's Robin Duncan, 49 West Boston.
because it's inappropriate, we want to know who it is.
Yes. You can always count on me for that. I would like to know why the agenda has put the ordinance as number 11 on the list, when there are 4 different proposals that are being discussed before the discussion of the ordinance. It seems to me that that is out of order because the ordinance is questionable.
So let me stop you, and in terms of the order, I don't think there's any particular reason why one gets put on sooner than another one. You sort of talk about the order for next time. That's the first time we've ever had that discussion. Second of all, the people who are put in these applications are going to fall into the old ordinance, even if we were to recommend a change.
But we were told when the ordinance was voted in, that there were only like 2 minor solar arrays that were proposed. And that, to me, that means that that should have been the starting point for a discussion about the new ordinance or the problems that the public has with the ordinance.
Well, the ordinance was advertised, there was publicity, and it was put in. Once it's put in, it applies to everybody.
It was put in during the pandemic.
It's put in.
It was put in May and then it was challenged in last fall.
But it remains a law. And people who apply under that law are protected under that law.
I think there should be a
And our next
moratorium.
item on the agenda is that proposed change. So,
When that was passed, they were told that that was not in stone and that when the solar companies came in, that we would be able to kind of tweak the ordinance and that it wasn't, when they put up the boundaries and stuff of the ordinance, they said that we're gonna pass.
first of all, I don't know who they are.
The town council
Well,
put it.
I'm not speaking for the town.
Well, they said that along the way, there would be chances to do bigger setbacks. And that, I mean, I was there at that and they were adamant that this was not going to be held for the solar arrays that were coming
And
in.
there can be. That's where the nitty gritty details come.
All right, well, you'll see me here then too.
I fully expect that.
Good.
All right, we all set? All right, let's go to item number 11. This is the request for an advisory opinion to the town council regarding proposed amendment to the solar ordinance. And this has been continued 3 times. It started in May, got continued in June, got continued in July. Not at our request, but at the. Somebody speaking on behalf. Absolutely. Can be anybody. I don't see anybody here. Go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
David Frost on 118th Street Farm Road. I believe the person who crafted this with Daniela was Scott Millar from Brooks Smart. It was on my invitation that Mr. Millar attended the town council meeting, or virtually attended the town council meeting last November, and presented an opinion letter to the town council. So there's a couple of issues, I think, as you guys view this. One, under chapter 45, you had the requirement to review this in a set period of time. I'll let council advise you as to whether that was met. I don't.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
This is in litigation.
That's absolutely
And we're not, this is not.
I'm ruling that out of line. You've sued
I'll
the town on
speak to-
that point. The Superior Court will decide that. And
Mr.
my understanding is there is no temporary restraining order. Therefore, we are going to proceed.
We're talking about something completely
I
different.
understand that, but you're.
But I
you're
still
mixing
have-
apples and oranges, and it's way above our pay.
But Mr. Chairman, I still have the right to state what I believe is fact without restriction.
But
This is
address
still,
the ordinance.
as I- ordinance itself addresses one of the main concerns of mine, which is the unrestricted growth of medium and large solar arrays in residential districts. And by any reading of the community comprehensive plan, there is no way you can get A to B. That this ordinance as presented, and while it speaks to more setback, it speaks to more of a buffer, principally speaks to the development of medium and large solar arrays in residential zones. And I would challenge that if we do not do something, that some citizens in this town may challenge this town relative to the comprehensive community. There are explicit steps that this board, as a planning board under chapter 45, must review as an amendment to.
Let's get to the substance of the ordinance.
I am asking
Proposed
you,
amendments.
Proposed amendment.
There is arguments in court. You're not
Counselor.
Superior Court.
Counselor,
You're not. And we're not going to decide that issue.
So we sat here month after month after month, and no proponent has stepped forward. But I'm going to challenge right now that this is what this town should do. It may not be perfect. We may have to actually revise setbacks and buffers. But by no means do we want large or medium solar arrays in our residential districts unrestricted. Our ordinance today allows for medium and large solar arrays in residential districts, unrestricted solely to setback and buffers. And that is untenable. And I would challenge, and will challenge, that this is not compliant to the comprehensive community plan for the whole. And whenever the town council gets around to the comprehensive community plan, which is new. That is my challenge, and I think it's this board's responsibility to view this amendment, this request for an amendment, in light of the request of the town council under chapter 45 in its entirety, and hold a public hearing on this.
They do something.
Now, it's what you do, something
No.
else, because you can
All
have,
we do is make a recommendation.
you should have a public hearing.
We're having a public hearing right now.
Well, again, without knowing that the applicant was gonna speak, and now your request for someone to speak on his behalf, I have stood, Mr. Chairman.
No, I have no problem with it.
Once again, you represent us. You're the difference between us and Camus. And if you have a problem representing us, then you should not be sitting at the dais.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you want to get personal about this? We sit here hours and hours and hours. for no
I've been in that chair.
For you to stand there and insult me and the members of this board is an excuse.
Mr. Chairman, I've sat in that chair on that dais for hours and hours and hours. Once again, it is all we ask is to be heard. All we ask is for allow us the opportunity. And if it's such that we have to take that ordinance and run it back through the town council to come back to you, so be it. Is that how it has to happen?
I don't know what's gonna happen today. But if that's the way it happens, that's the way it happens. The town council has the final view.
Absolutely, but you have the recommendation.
Right.
And you're now asking for, if this is a public hearing, then my issue is that if we do not look at this seriously, if we do not bring subject matter experts in, if we do not actually bring proper land use experts in, and which I will be willing to bring in as you desire, we will not have a proper review of our solar ordinances passed or net new. And quite frankly, we will not have it reviewed against our comprehensive plan. When this board originally approved the amendment to solar ordinance, had a responsibility to actually review it in the light of the comprehensive community. I won't get into whether that was done or was not done. I would only ask that this ordinance, this amendment, be properly reviewed in light of the comprehensive community plan against our existing ordinance. I know your hands are bound to the ordinance that was approved by the town council, but all I'm asking for is that ordinances are subject to change. And ordinances often, we realize after the fact, that they may have had a greater, they could have a greater impact than intended. And I think that the proponent of the original ordinance, may not have realized the extent of the potential damage that unrestricted medium and large solar array residential could do to the state. So I would ask that this board seriously consider some kind of a public I don't know what the next step would be on this, but I would think that you would have some kind of an open forum.
This is a public meeting on an agenda item that is under the statutory procedure, referral to this board for consideration of proposed amendments to the existing ordinance. It's not a challenge to the existing ordinance. And this board can make whatever recommendations is fit to the town council, and then there will be a public hearing for the town.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know what's gonna happen.
But wouldn't
Whatever happens, you're gonna have another shot at town council.
But you guys are the experts. You guys are the planning
No, I
board that
understand,
has
I
to
understand.
actually make a recommendation as it relates to the comprehensive community plan. So if you don't tonight make a recommendation as to how this amendment impacts the comprehensive community plan, you have not met your obligations under chapter 45. That's council.
What he's arguing is the issues in his lawsuit that he brought in Superior Court, that the court dismissed and is threatened. So this is totally inappropriate for what the matter is.
It has something to do with the lawsuit. It has everything to do with what the responsibility under chapter
I'm not
45
gonna
is
argue
of
the
this board.
lawsuit here. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say?
Yes, I'd like you to do your job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For reminding us. Stay right there. Got any questions?
Yes, I'm gonna get myself in trouble here. But I think he has the community has a valid point that if they feel the need, which I agree with a lot of them, that we don't just leave an open door to everybody who wants to come in because of the deals that have been made to give these incentives for the solar farms, that if they need to voice their opinion to possibly change what the comprehensive community plan has, gets it more in line with what the community, most community wants, I think they deserve the right to have that here,
And
whether it's
what they-
here
what
or
they
in front of the
should
town
do.
council.
I don't know what's gonna happen, but what they should do is get in front of the town council, ask for there to be a workshop, bring in their experts and try to figure out what, if anything, should be changed and when and how. And town council will make a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, maybe you could, in your opinion, back to the town council, make that recommendation.
No,
Or maybe this body could vote on that same recommendation.
This body is not a legislative body.
It is
that
not.
enacts
Well,
Zoning ordinance.
we say legislative, but we only can deal with the issues of.
Right, the sole power to enact a zoning ordinance or an amendment to a zoning ordinance is the town council.
Town
Period.
council. Period.
Yes, but they've asked you for recommendations.
We are,
Recommendation.
and one way or another, we're gonna give them. Anybody else have any questions?
I have a few questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Shaw.
So number one, I see that in the ordinance, the residential zones are all indicated with Ns for large and medium scale solar. Does that mean, what does the N mean? Is it not allowed?
That's the proposed amendment.
So what does the S mean?
Especially for us, they have to,
So they can't automatically do it. They
No,
need
it's
to
not
go
automatic.
before us.
It's not a matter
it would be before the zoning board.
So that's sort of, it's not an open door, right?
Well, it is an open door because the
It's a
ordinance-
special use permit, it's not an open door.
special use permits can put certain restrictions on it.
But we can,
Cannot
we
stop.
have the opportunity at least to make our opinion on it, and
So far, this board has basically said, quote unquote, our hands are tied, we have to follow the ordinance.
you have specific
Well, the
examples
ordinance-
of that.
Yes, I can, I'll submit them. So. One of the things I said, you missed the meeting that you were on Zoom, but last month, was that the ordinance is actually written that it be a minimum of a 50-foot buffer, a minimum, I'm sorry, a 50-foot setback, and a minimum of a 30-foot buffer. Minimum. And so we were talking about it relative to the project on West Main Union and the watershed district. And whether that met a criteria for this board.
Is this the Patriot Petroleum project?
Yes. Whether that met that criteria of the board, that you could actually go beyond the written word of the ordinance and actually now review it as saying, well, maybe that language of minimum should really be called here, where we need a greater buffer between us and our
It's gonna be.
and water sources. So the reality is
that in a residential?
I'd have to look
I
at
thought
the
that was
zoning.
commercial.
Mr. Chairman,
People
though,
that are right.
No, but I'm talking about exact zone residential. or residential.
that's
It's
that's
water.
commercial.
So it meets the zoning requirements. That array would meet the requirements.
And it would meet the ordinance today as well.
Right, but
But a special use permit, as you know, is granted pretty much.
that's not what we're talking
Just
about.
what
I
we're
was
saying.
addressing your issue with the residential, right?
Right.
So that doesn't necessarily. not what you're
So
talking
right now, we allow for medium and large solar arrays in
In a
residential
commercial.
zones.
Okay.
And residential zones. I'm not
No.
not
With a
necessarily.
special use permit, though, you're saying that it's a automatic, it's a developer's right, it's not a developer's right, they can't just do it.
You can put some restrictions in, but you can't store it. And what I'm saying is it does not belong. I mean, in the comprehensive community plan, and there's all sorts of items, but you don't address ground mounted solar except for as an auxiliary use to farm. And that's a problem. And this body can actually make a recommendation to the town council that you guys have to give us better structure around how we approve ground mounted solar. We're not in opposition to you. What we're saying, we're standing up for every silent resident in this town and saying, do we really want in an open 5-acre parcel that may be treated today in a residential zone, a medium or large solar array. And I don't think any of us want that.
So it
But
depends.
this ordinance right now is written will allow it.
But how is it zoned? That's the question. If it's a 5-acre commercial zone, you could end up with a junkyard. you know what I mean?
I'm not arguing at all
Right.
that it doesn't belong in commercial, possibly with restrictions, that it doesn't belong in light industrial with restrictions.
Right.
You know, we have the one on West Shore, which is on industrial license. And that's well used.
It's a pretty good use. I would
Right.
say.
And we're not opposing that. What we're opposing is the unrestricted medium and large solar arrays in residential zones that do not meet the comprehensive community plan in any other way, no matter how you view or read that document.
Is it our responsibility to review that though? Like, I mean, that's, the comprehensive plan was what, 2002? That what they approved? That's what we're dealing with now?
This one is just.
Right, so there was a 2019.
Right.
And in either case, it does not.
But
speak
there was
around-
no solar in 2002, right? So
No, there wasn't.
it's like,
Yes, but even the new plan speaks of ground mounted solar as an auxiliary use too.
I'm not disagreeing with you for the record. I just want to know, like, I agree with you and I don't know the proper process to get your concerns across to.
Well, I guess neither do we, because the reality is that we were late to the switch, I guess, on the original. And shame on us, right? But we are residents. And we want to speak, and we want to find a vehicle to speak. I brought Scott Millar to the town council, and Daniela proceeded to, with the help, I believe, of the town, in crafting this. Look, at some point in time, there has to be a workshop. We have to come to the middle on some of this stuff, because we don't want to absolutely restrict solar use. All of us support it to the majority, but we just can't, if you had a 10-acre parcel next to you in your residential zone, would you like a solar array literally 30 feet from your side yard?
I would like it, but how is it zoned? That's the point. It's like, if it's
It's
residential.
residential stuff, no, I mean, right? But today it is the one. So
With a special use permit.
I'm not gonna stop them from doing it.
No, that remains.
It may
You have the
require them
opportunity to comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't remain to be seen. We've seen West Main Solar 2 is residential. Sorry. It's a 50-foot setback.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone else? Anyone else wish to speak? Come on.
And for the record, I would like to thank Mr. Croston for bringing that up, and I'd like to voice my
Name and address.
Mary Sipel on 24 West Passage Drive, and I'd like to voice my agreement.
Sure.
Mr. Croston.
So again, 287 Vanderbilt Lane, and thank you for hearing us, I really appreciate it, but I just wanted to clarify one thing. So we have a town ordinance that establishes setbacks and how many feet from the fires and all of those things for solar farms. Has there been no health and safety studies done before the ordinance was?
When you say health and safety, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
All right, well, there are risks with everything, and I'm certainly not an expert. I am a healthcare provider, and there are a lot of people that have side effects and issues with electromagnetic radiation. I mean, it's not a benign thing. I mean, I'm for solar energy, but does anybody know really if there's negative health effects to a very large solar farm 30 feet from a household? Does anybody know that?
I've asked the question. And I was expecting that there might be, and not that this person was the Dr. Solar panels, whatever. But he said that's one of the beauties of solar panels, that they do not hear that off. People that live under high-powered cables, we all know what that certainly does, even though they won't admit it. But as far as of what they told us about solar panels, let alone people having them on their own house and worrying about it for large ones, that they said there's no evidence, no background, no backdoor, anything that anybody has said in front of them. Reason why it's moved forward, because nobody's come forward, even almost questioning, but the fact that it's not brought up as negative, because you know, if there was that opportunity, everybody would try to take that as much as possible. Never has anybody come up with any like that first line with the side of it, living next to solar.
So we can say unequivocally
No,
that there are no problems with solar.
we can't say if we wear a mask or not wearing a mask, we can't say, not saying it's a matter, you've got to take the opinion of the experts that you get the information from. But
What I'm
there
just
is
saying is
nobody,
that we have documentation that we've done our due diligence for the people of Portsmouth just to rule that out. Like I said, I'm a healthcare provider, I'm not an expert, I have heard differing opinions, but as long as the town has consulted the experts,
I can't say
in
that.
long term, there's not a problem.
I only was speaking for myself. I would, you would have to ask the town council or somebody like that, if they've ever done anything like that. I purely, because I asked that question.
Our ordinance was drafted under the guidance of the state, state guidelines for solar. It's not that we're proposing, that this town's model and proposing use of solar.
No, I would just, it's reassuring to hear that someone has looked into that. I hate to see down the road that we problems.
But I think like you're saying, I think high power lines.
That's a little more reassured that
Those panels, they don't get those high tension cables, at 400,000 volts or 40,000 volts, traveling in bare exposed wires. Each solar panel that goes into a cable is hardly anything.
I just was concerned that the people making the decisions would have the information and have done their research and consulted experts in the field. Because there's always in a trial, there's an expert witness for both sides. Feel better now. So thank you.
I would expect that we try to see it. All this stuff would be the potatoes, that you would have some information.
So, because I'm sure the owners of the projects and the owners of the individuals or companies that are putting in those solar farms, sure, they would probably be able to present you with safety information, but I would
Their
just think,
version.
but I would just think that there's probably another side as well that's not profiting from the project.
Right, that's why I say you should, as a, try to pull that information. There's that opportunity. Yang.
Thank you.
All right.
Anyone else? Come on up, sir.
Rich Young, 49, this message. I just want to make one observation. About a quarter of a mile to the north of my house is the area for Cox place. About no more than half a mile, about a quarter of a mile to the southwest of my house, Navy base. Farther down, about a mile from my house, no more than a mile and a half, so Chase Farm Road. Number 7 goes in, that's 200 yards directly to the south of my house. That's 4 arrays in the circumference of a mile. So I'm going to say, where else is that happening? Where else is that happening?
Come on up, sir.
Christian Sullivan, 799 Union Street. Had a couple questions on the letter, that recommendation letter you guys have for the council. So I do understand that the complete adoption of the proposed solar ordinance amendments would effectively eliminate almost all zones capable of supporting large-scale solar within Portsmouth. But it states on that recommendation letter that no changes to the existing ordinance were recommended. So I guess my first question was there any discussion of a compromise by the planning board, or is this kind of like a yes or no type recommendation request from the council? What you guys
I
would
was gonna ask to approve this modification. There is nobody to negotiate with.
Okay,
So to answer your question, at least the way I see it, maybe the board sees it different.
sure.
But I see it as a yay or nay.
Okay,
All happen. And quite frankly, I find that a little bit troubling because it puts us in a spot. That's why I suggested a workshop. Where people can sit down and say, this doesn't make any sense about this, and you sort of hammer out something that may be more palatable. But we're being asked to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
okay, glad that you said that because it probably alleviates a little bit of a deal. The rest of it, my questions and what I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that these large scale things are one of the things. Personally. I think that these should be on the top of the roof of every flat building in town. I think that they should be, in all of, we have in our society this idea that everything has to be centralized. That everything has got to be bigger to be better. Quite frankly, if we did this on a more decentralized scale, much less intrusive in our society, I think that we have more solar and we'd be just as well. But that's not where the money is.
Sadly, would have to agree with that, which is kind of, I guess, some of the other questions that I have here. I'll try to just be as brief as possible. Under the, as it reads, that, no changes were suggested to be made as a result, and that's kind of like what you said, it's, you guys weren't really put in a position to do that. I'm hoping that now we've spoken about this, we might move in that direction. And I am well aware that everything that has been submitted prior to this is not going to fall under potential change unless they have to reapply. But that aside, I guess the more important second reason for the adoption to the amendments on the basis of would be that the planning board would be able to retain the ability to use the site-specific restrictions based on individual criteria. This should suffice as like a means of protection in certain situations and projects where it's needed. You kind of already answered this, but when you agree that that's a lot of responsibility to put on you guys, not specifically just the yes or no, but the actual site-specific, component of that. I mean, for example, I guess, how many projects, and there was 4 on today, some have been tabled, things like that, but how many projects has this site-specific restriction ability actually been exercised on? I don't know if anyone knows.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't believe,
Michael might.
I don't believe the planning board has approved a solar array.
So we're not there yet.
Under this, the zoning board has, I know. On one side, it was at the minimum. But in that site, there were no objections from the others, and I think the topography,
That kind of answers my next question. Was great. Does anyone know in what fashion or why? Because I kind of felt that was an important, component to that question, but also just the fact that has it been utilized at what stage of the application process? And I'm not trying to kick our horse here, but we've kind of gone back and forth as far as what's considered conceptual and what isn't. I don't want to advise anyone on how to write these things out, but perhaps we should use that word on some of these agendas just for our sake back here, so that we understand what is conceptual, what isn't. And the only reason why I say that is because sometimes the design, the review part that comes before is either disregarded or blended, and then the preliminary application for the master plan is sometimes combined into the master plan application thing. So that can be you can see how it gets kind of confusing.
It does happen with some applications. It's not happening
Okay.
with any of these.
Do you know if an abutter was the catalyst, or did the planning board take it upon themselves to really look into that, the project that you're talking? I know you said there wasn't any abutter concerns, but I guess on that one, or the only one that made it to that level, did any of the planning board members look into that project?
it was a zoning board.
Okay,
It was a residential zone property.
so it didn't fall.
Yeah.
Okay. My other question would be, who do we use to validate engineering proposals, calculations, et cetera, on this scale? When we're doing these style solar arrays, just because this is something else that wasn't particularly covered in that. I know it was a yes or no, so I guess, a lot of these things might be viewpoints here, but it's definitely, I think, educational at best to hear what you guys have to say about some of these things. Is just, as a town, are we able to contact them? Is there a list? I don't think there's anyone in-house. Is there members of like a private sector that we usually call on, or is it case by case? And the only reason why I say that, and kind of honestly move for that to be up to discussion, if we ever are able to produce a recommendation letter with more defense for your, on behalf of you guys and us, the engineering firms and other professionals that are often presenting these are obviously acting on the interests of their clients. And I've done a little bit of research on these in most municipalities. It's pretty common. I mean, it protects you, protects us, protects the town. Especially when you look at the nature of most of these proposals that are coming in. I mean, most of them are large, large scale companies, sometimes international, and sometimes, most from what I've witnessed here, maybe with the exception of one or two, the people that either own the properties or lease the properties or looking to do it aren't living here either. So just kind of wondering if we do that at all, or if we have plans to do that.
We don't have a town engineer.
It might be.
The authority to hire peer engineering.
We've done that in the past.
Yeah.
When we think.
We've
we're
had
kind of
serious
being
questions
buffaloed,
about
right. Yeah.
We have forced the applicants to hire an independent engineer to review the calculations.
Yeah.
Assessments.
I mean, would it be, I think would you kind of agree that almost if we were able to revisit a letter that, of recommendation or non-recommendation on more key points that you guys would kind of see that in this particular situation, maybe there should be some slightly more explicit verbiage as to, we should almost every time be contacting other people to validate these items.
That's not where we're at now. It's certainly something that could happen.
Okay. I guess lastly, I'd like to kind of circle back around to the first reason. The states that we should not adopt the amendments in any capacity, and that was the lack of space that would remain viable for large-scale solar after the restrictions. The prime motive for this was to remain compliant or in line with the comprehensive plan referenced in the, the final summary paragraph of findings. That's basically the end of the solar ordinance. I'm not going to read it. I'm sure you guys already know what that is, but.
I said half an hour, these people are just going on and on.
Okay, well, I already.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Forgot about people listening.
To my last few questions here, guys. So I'm kind of curious, what the purpose of allowing looser regulations on large-scale solar installations close to residential zones, apart from complying with the comprehensive plan and only the physical, I use this word lightly, hey, there's a solar field there in Portsmouth sense. The reason why I word it like that is because I cannot seem to find how any of them actually contribute to the sustainable renewable energy resources available to the town or the residents in any capacity. I really would like to be proved wrong here. For the record, I'm full, with new environmentally green energy technology, I'm all about it. But no regulation is placed that I'm aware of that benefits the town or residents immediately over time. How does each project actually offset our municipal energy demand from the grid when the power is sold to an electrical transmission utility company for private profit? I'm just curious if you guys know if there's an energy tax placed on this town that the town can collect, that the town can place on it, or something in that fashion. I was unable to.
Above our bakery.
Yeah, that is just. I mean, do they offset power costs municipally or by residents or affect our taxes? It would be nice.
No, I don't think it's direct. There are tax issues, others. Personal property tax, things like that, but outside that.
I know there was a question asked in one or two meetings ago, the difference between whatever the tax was before the solar farm was being conceived, what the town was getting, and then what does the town get out of that by changing it from whatever unused land to be solar
Yeah.
arrays. And there was some financial benefit. Although some people will say, well, at one point that land was valued at this much, and then somehow the land became less valuable when it came time for the utility people to use that. I think it'd be the town council, that question to ask them.
Yeah.
If you take that land before and after, once that solar panels are all in, what is the benefit to the town? That would be a good question, so I don't think we can answer that.
I think you also have to look at like, what's the alternative? You're not doing a solar on a parcel, where are you gonna do that? What does the junkyard do for the town?
So that's actually,
You know what I mean? It's like,
and that's like my last point here,
Right.
is really that, I mean, it's right, like I'm about the solar thing, it's just, what does it, maybe, in comparison to a junkyard, yes, but when you really look at what happens, I mean, when you really look at what happens here, we already kind of spoke about the average business proposition and who comes in and does these things, but realistically, minimum on these are 20, sometimes 30-year terms. They basically, moving forward, they effectively block the zones out of any other potential from housing to businesses for locals or farmers, even municipal use. I mean, basically anything else for a 20-year term. So you've got proceeds that are going to, profiting, that's either going to the company that's installing solar or vice versa. And we're not seeing it. And now Portsmouth doesn't have use of that land for anything else. And if we're not getting tax incentives, if it's not actually contributing to some kind of resilient microgrid in the event of a natural disaster or whatever, I mean, it's essentially, I don't understand where a recommendation for such a loose solar ordinance, that just why we would put that forward. But I mean, he kind of answered it, was a yes or no, and I would almost use this entire back and forth discussion as saying, you guys got posed with a loaded question, and it was really rough. It puts you in a hard spot, and it puts us in a heck of a hard
Town
spot
council
too.
doesn't all the time, but that's.
I mean, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think, Dave mentioned something earlier. It'd be great if you guys are able to push something up the pipe that we can, I'd be more than happy. I know a lot of other people would be too, just to try. So.
I just want to say, I was listening to the radio on the way here, and I'm a gasoline loving car and motorcycle guy. So it always goes up my fanny when the government's saying that by 2030, 50% of all cars sold have to be electric. And then where does that electricity come from? Currently, you get it from a power plant that's either coal fired or gas fired, and you tear up the land to make the battery. So, but these solar farms at least limit how much the earth has to be torn up for coal-fired plants or gas-fired plants from doing pollution. I certainly don't want to see a bunch of wind farms, what is done for some of the citizens in this town. With just that one.
I couldn't agree more with you.
It's just that I'm waiting for the tank farm space to open up, and solar, where you couldn't build a house or do anything. But someone's been paying taxes sitting on the land. You go down the road in some areas and you see these dead woods sitting there waiting. Next thing you know, there's a casino. People have been sitting on it paying their taxes. They have the right to do something with it. And in a lot of cases, it's a lot better than seeing a whole neighborhood or a recycling plant or a new extension to the dump farm or something.
You're right. And I wouldn't argue, I would never, stand here and say that I'm opposing an argument that says, you want to take the rights away from someone, or that something else worse could otherwise go in. I'm simply saying that I think it's kind of like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole when you say, well, allowing a loose ordinance like this to go in because we're trying to carry the weight of a larger, I'm an environmentalist as far as they come, I mean, you guys heard me last time extensively, so I get it. I just say, as Portsmouth residents at the town, we also have interests here too, and although maybe this helps from a junkyard going in or something else, it also prevents us from other, as I would say, if that is also a problem, then we look at tighter regulations on junkyards. in these zones too, to help, you know, formulate better uses of these places.
As much as being a carpenter, I'd love to have a junkyard. That's never gonna happen. But, yeah.
Do you have anything else?
That's it. Thank you, guys.
Come on up, sir.
Hi, my name's David Howard. I live at 36 Burial Rose Drive. I'd first like to ask if I could read an email from Anne Marie Van Hoff, who was sick and couldn't make it. She's on 60 Sweet Farm Road, her property abuts the proposed development across from Melville School, West Main Road. Would that be okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Specific to that project.
Yeah, is it specific to the project,
No.
or is it generally to the?
It's a general statement.
Go ahead.
I strongly object to any solar farms replacing healthy forested land. Solar is an important tool in fighting climate change, but we need to be smart about where it goes. All solar projects should wait to be approved until the ordinance is adjusted in order to protect our island. My biggest concern with all the proposed solar projects and the ordinance in its current form is that it is a bare form ordinance that doesn't take into account the complicated issues that arise with large scale solar. There's no sense environmentally in clearing healthy forested land to replace with solar. Wildlife will be displaced, including coyotes, which are already proving to be an increasing problem in our town. Hawks and other wildlife will also be displaced. Forested land provides an essential role in water flow and is important to prevent flooding. The recent UN climate change report release tells us that East Coast cities and towns will be most affected by increased rain and flooding. It is essential that we keep in place the natural protections that we have against flooding to preserve as much of our area as possible. This year's rainy summer is nothing compared to what we can expect. Our small island will be greatly affected by climate change, and the biggest action we can do to combat that is to keep our healthy forest trees. We should be planting many more, in my opinion. Solar should not be developed near abutting residential properties, in my opinion. Abutters will also have their value significantly decreased. Studies show by up to 7%. As these solar projects increase, more and more of the town will be affected. Portsmouth is a small town and solar proposals are abundant, given the current ordinance makes it easy for developers. Are we expected to take such a hit financially for solar farms that will hurt the climate by clearing forests? We have plenty of space for solar on existing rooftops and paved land. These are the spaces that should be reserved for solar. Solar is an important aspect of fighting climate change, but should not be tearing down healthy forested land. That's personal. I also sent a letter to Mr. Brzezinski to the board, and most of those topics have been covered. I agree with Mr. Croston that any commercial development of a solar array in the residential zone areas is not in accordance with the comprehensive plan. I also agree that a 50-foot buffer or setback level is inadequate. That brings me to a question. Not sure I understood what you told the last speaker about all or none. Does one flaw in the solar amendment that have been proposed kick out the entire set of amendments?
No, there's a proposal in front of us. You're being asked to either approve it or not. All I
In
said.
its entirety? Can you, so if you have a problem with the 200-foot setback that they recommended, does that mean you have to disapprove the entire package of
If we
amendments?
were going to do that, we'd have to have another hearing. We'd have to have that proposal. And people would have to have their say on it. We've been given a particular set of things that we've been asked for.
So everything is falling out, basically.
Yes,
You either
essentially right
approve it or
now.
you don't.
Again, that's not to say that this is something that can't be revisited in a different way.
Okay, I also would like to echo both what Ms. Van Hoff has said about, supposedly protecting our climate and destroying the environment. And the developer should be encouraged to build in open areas, not on the forest. And also, one of the gentlemen talked about the impact on real values of homes. He's surrounded by arrays. I will have 2 arrays within 1/10 of a mile of my house if proposed developments go through. Plus all those others. I will have the Navy solar array, which is nice, and everybody knows that. I would have the one across from Melville School, less than 100 yards. So if the URI study says that any house within 1/10 of a mile of a solar array has its value depreciated by 7%, what does that do for me? What does it do for the other residents that are more and more being faced with the proliferation of solar arrays in a small area? There's no provision that I can see in the current ordinance that protects us. Now, you may say, well, is it in the amendment? If it's not, can't talk about it. I need to at least plant the seed that rampant development of solar arrays in any one small area of town is certainly detrimental to that area. And if there's no limit on where solar arrays can be built, we're going to find them temporary. This town is going to make it that easy for developers to walk in and do this. And we have such a developer-friendly ordinance. We're going to be in trouble.
Looking for them.
I don't know what you could do anything about that. I don't think it needs to be said.
We're gonna interrupt.
I thought it was.
Yeah, no, I know you didn't mean to interrupt.
Well,
You have
as
the right to speak.
Mr. Cross and other people have said, you have the opportunity to force change to the ordinance. I'm really disappointed that it's all up and all down. And if it's all down, then it certainly will have to be revisited because there's too many people that have a vested interest in seeing it fixed. The last thing I would like to say, and nobody else I don't think has said it, I'd like to thank you again for your volunteering to the town for your service. It's obviously not easy to sit there and take what you feel is abuse, what we feel are righteous opinions.
Listen, if I were in your shoes, I might be exactly where you want to.
Oh, well,
So that's my attitude is, it's always that, the public has rights.
okay,
And
thank you.
that's just part of being on board with this.
Okay,
So as long as the people speaking are abusive, then I don't feel abused.
okay. Well, I'm trying to go out of my way not to be abusive this time.
No, you're not. Yeah.
So the only comment I want to make, and probably before, we have to be careful. If this is there could be many worse things that can go into a space that can devalue someone's house even more. And unfortunately, like I bought land in the past, knowing that certain things could be built, and I stuck my head in the sand and just hoped or closed my eyes, hoping that it would never happen, but things did happen. Well, now I know people got snookered on West Passage or whatever, that they said that land could never be built on. They wanted this development for like commercial project is and stuff. And just because somebody says so doesn't make it true. Unfortunately, when something proposed, there are places where much worse things can go in that space, and it might be the best of the worst things.
Well, it is a little bit of rebuttal there with a 50-foot setback, 30-foot buffer. Some of the plans I've seen call for berms and catching basins for runoff. And that's exactly what hurt the people in the West Passage. And it is 50 feet, is that far enough away? And will the residents adequately be protected?
But that firm was
It
a,
was
and
illegal.
no engineering, no approval, no anything. So if an engineer had seen it, he'd probably say that didn't work, and we wouldn't have no problem.
Well, and that's true, but the poor people in West Massachusetts suffered for like 2 years without having town answer. And I just would hate to see that happen.
I agree.
So it's actually, we're, we certainly don't want to say that.
If I'm not mistaken, that DEM has to correct it and they're still not compliant.
No, it's- yeah, we gotta move on. You're talking about stuff, it's not-
Thank you very much for your time.
No, not a
Anything else?
Anybody have any questions? Come on up, sir. Do we have anybody on the, on Zoom?
Not with their hand raised, no.
Okay. Well,
And Christensen, 60 Young Drive.
thank you.
Just have a question. What is our next? Those of us who are opposed to the margin rates, what do we do next? I don't want to go to the town council meeting and find out this is a fait accompli. What do we do next? Can you give us some advice?
All right, what else we making our recommendations? to the council?
Yeah, we're gonna be making a recommendation to town council, one way or another.
And
And
what do we do?
you show up and you beat the towns and no, I think what, I can tell you where my head is on this. I'm not speaking for the board. I'm just telling you where my head is. I have I have some trouble with several provisions. But I would not mind in a recommendation from us saying, you don't agree with this, but that the town council should have a workshop bringing in all of the stakeholders to have this stuff turned out to maybe we get a better product. That'll be very necessary. And then people have got to show up, they've got to speak in favor of that, and they've got to, convince the town council that's what they've got. That would just, I'm not speaking for.
I think this is probably the wrong place to be doing all this.
Yeah, I was supposed to be giving you advice. I could just tell you what, I think. Thank you. Come on up, sir.
Tom Gidley, 19 Chelsea Drive.
Go ahead.
I'd like to voice my support for making these changes. Current ordinance is too easy. The developers come up here and they say time and again, it meets all the minimum requirements. Progressing. Personally, I'd like to see a moratorium. If this is as good as we can get. Let's stop the damage now and make the changes that you were just referring to, rather than leaving the door open. But more of these come in, and then this.
Town council. We can't create more.
No, but you can recommend modifications that will at least stop the bleeding. Personally, I think the townspeople don't want these in our neighborhoods. I'm not sure that message is, I don't get a sense that that message is getting through. I don't think it's in line with the comprehensive plan. I don't think it's in line with what people want in the comprehensive plan. I don't think they want to see these. They don't belong in neighborhoods. Making these changes and get us on the road to fix the things. I would like to see it happen.
Sorry. No one expected a lot of things to happen. Portsmouth was a nice sleepy town. And they want to bring big box stores into town. The town had never ever thought they even had to be concerned about how big a store would be. That was happening in Middletown. But Middletown that made a cap, Newport made a cap, Tiverton made a cap, Bristol made a cap, all the people made caps instead of Portsmouth. So it might be worth next time when there's that workshop, find out why there aren't all these other things in these other towns. Why is Portland being picked on? And maybe use that as evidence, what they've done ahead of time, so that you can bring that to the attention to the town council, and that maybe that would be a little better ammunition.
Sounds like a great idea. It seems like there is something we can do now.
Any questions?
Hey,
Go ahead.
Sort of comment to tie that in general. Theme thing again, there's a lot of disparaging of that minimum ordinance being easy or too defend everything, I want to suggest, because I think absolutely some of those elements could be changed. Again, we looked over those individually. But you know, the intent behind the minimum standard, you may have a suitable site that's proposed that doesn't compromise your view shed, your town character, all the concerns that may be out there at the minimum standard just by luck of whatever natural topography, vegetative screening, budding neighbors, whatever you have budding to that proposed development. So the idea is not to be overly restrictive to a site or a land developer. It needs to be right that or have, you know, those proposals comes very close to that. But you know, so again, I think we're looking at individual elements, but it's also, you know, there's going to be a compromise, because the other side of this, we danced around the 200-foot setbacks, and you know, is that arbitrary? I just want to say too, you know, I appreciate the town, Bob's here, and Mike's efforts to come to, you know, what helped me is wow, 100 feet setback, that's a lot. Well, when it comes out, it says we've got 33 potential sites, and essentially they're all, none of them are viable, either economically or by square root, which is zero. If you do that, so that calls the question of each individual other, still got it on this area that's being proposed. That one remark essentially shoots it down to the proposal is let's not use solar. Okay, so if that's what we're trying to discuss, that's a different conversation.
Speaking for me personally, I wouldn't mind if that happened, so that it could be revisited and done and fix all the problems that we see. But let us say, like you're saying, we want 30 feet because there may be some cases where that's appropriate. And I would like to see whatever town board is, I hope this board, the zoning board, not just take it when the developer says, I'm meeting the minimums, you've got to approve this. I'd like to see some pushback to say, we need more in this case. Right.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody on, come on up, sir. You didn't raise your hand. I didn't
I
see
told
you.
you I'm
I
inappropriate.
didn't see you. I didn't see you. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Bruce Bay. I live at 84 Sweet Farm Road.
Thank you.
Just a couple of quick things. Number one, in 1987, I broke ground on my house, moved in 88. And I was told by several people in the town government that Sweet Farm Road would never be connected to West Main Road. Lo and behold, a couple of years go by, we have West Passage. Now, what made it attractive is I had little kids. So there was only really one way in and one way out instead of a steady stream of traffic. Well, that didn't turn out very well. So we have West Passage, no offense to those who live on it. The second thing is, and probably the most important, is we went to the town council. We went with rational arguments, we went with data. They let us talk, but they didn't listen. We did not oppose this ordinance. We were not opposed to it. We were opposed to a couple of the features in there. And get me this, we weren't opposed strictly for us. We were opposed for the entire town of Portsmouth. If you look in the paper, you'll see that now we want to take some residential property and rezone that to light industrial commercial. You wonder why that is. So my question is the plan to take all of the open space that's not residential and just build nothing but solar farms? The fact of the matter is, we don't benefit at all. The last thing that's true about solar farms is that they're about green energy. They're not. They're about making money. And I would submit the town's not going to get much of anything out of any of these solar farms. At least if you had a business, you'd have people with jobs working. We don't have any of that. You've got some electricity, some energy that's being sold to someone else. So what I would tell you is, we made good arguments. We didn't get any input to this ordinance. Frankly, I'm astonished, and I seem to be the only one that is unhappy with the fact that the town didn't write the ordinance. The town gave it to an attorney to write, who wrote it to benefit his clients, and it turns out also himself. How can I be the only one that's got a problem with that? It doesn't smell right to me at all. So my point is, I don't have any faith, and I don't think anybody else does anymore, that we can get any support to do the right thing for the town. And we had this argument about home values, whether or not it would actually hurt your value, hurt your assessment. Probably not the assessment, but I guarantee you that it's certainly going to diminish the pool of potential buyers when they find out there are solar farms all around your property that you've spent 30 or 40 years grooming and building into a family home. We seem to have little or no voice at all in this process. We come to you because the town and the town council clearly did not have any intention of listening to us.
Anybody else? No, her first. Trouble. We need trouble first. Appropriate.
But my real name is Robin Young.
Address.
49 West Passage Drive.
Thank
And I have to say that, I know that you're on this board because you care about Portsmouth. And so I'm not accusing any of you of anything. But I certainly would like for you to do something now before I am living next to a 20-acre solar array. And I'm sure my neighbors would agree with me on that. I don't want to be, this is grandfathered in because the ordinance hasn't been re-examined. I think that because there is such a movement in town against all of these solar arrays, and really listen to the people of this town and realize that who's benefiting with these solar arrays? The landowner who owns the property, the company, and the lawyers. The rest of us are going to have to live with that for 20 years. When we wake up in the morning, we're going to look out our windows and see a sea of glass and metal. And it's in my neighborhood now. It's all along West Main Road. You know what is happening. It's a free-for-all. And that is because Portsmouth is for sale. It's just a weak ordinance, and the companies are coming because they know that we're pushovers. And I think that there really needs to be a moratorium, a workshop, or whatever. I know you've said you have limited powers, but I'm just a little citizen I'm standing up here and I'm trying to defend my neighbors, my family, the future of Portsmouth. Do we really want to live in a town like this? I'm defending what my children will inherit in this town and what your children will inherit in this town. And those companies don't live in our neighborhood. They don't live in our towns. And honestly, you better watch out, because if there's a little patch of land next to your house, they'll be after that too. So please do something now to help us put an end to this, and to at least revisit the ordinance before these solar arrays go into place. I guess that's it.
With you. An unfair statement from a previous person talking about that all solar farms, all things are bad, and reduced the value of everything. The lawyer that has his own solar farm has made every house in his neighborhood much more valuable by tearing down the crappy industrial wasteland. And everybody was putting their garbage on there, they were being overgrown. And wiped out a fallen apart building, total, just terrible things. And was putting solar on a cement slab that was already existing. Totally different ones that just drive me crazy to think that they're gonna knock down the forest. So, but not every one of them, so it shouldn't be shut down and say, no, nothing will go until the bottom line. That one there is a no brainer. It's the poster child for what we all wish it could be. So I agree that we should argue the hell out of the ones that are ruining good land and screwing up stuff. But to say that every one of them takes the value away, that one there is one that raises the value and it's not very bad site. So I agree with that.
I'll concede that, and I agree. I mean, I'm not against solar, I'm not against alternative energy, I can see that the planet's on fire. So I accept that there are legitimate places, rooftops. There are so many places where it could work, but to clear 20 acres of land, to clear lands near a reservoir with our drinking water, it doesn't make sense.
I agree, 100% with that.
All right, any other questions? All right, sir, I cut you off before. That's okay.
No comment on Wade, West Passage Drive. I just wanted to make it clear in my own mind what the next step is. I kind of believe that you're going to give your advisory opinion to the town council. Then after they get their opinion, when would the opportunity for a workshop?
Well, first of all, to have a workshop, they have to schedule. So there's going to be, at some point, whatever recommendation is will end up on their agenda. Now, if we, as a board, again, I was speaking for myself, if we put in there that we think that there should be a townwide workshop on this, then that's also one of the things that goes to the town plan, and they have to make a decision. They can schedule. Right, in terms of sequence.
One of the concerns I have is that this process can take a long time to get to an ordinance that town people and the industry can say we both gave a little, but that's compromise. In the meantime, all these applications are coming through, and I'm kind of thinking just, you're gonna say there's no more land to be developed, that we don't need it.
If you think that a moratorium is appropriate, bring it up to the town council.
What would be the forum to do that?
I would do it right at the same time. Or you could put it on, anybody can put an item on the agenda for the town council. You don't have to be the same thing with our agenda. Like I get calls about that. It's a proper forum. We discuss the public's business. And so you think that's appropriate? You're a citizen of the town, you have the right to put it on the agenda.
One thing I want to point out, when we were reviewing the ordinance way back when in COVID times, I spent a lot of time looking at ordinances of other towns in the area and the state without a template. And the thing that I find striking is that our current ordinance is a Rev B, and Exeter is at Rev 9. So I just think that if you have a collaborative environment, you're going to see a lot of revs. I think the fact that we're Rev B says it hasn't been collaborative. It's been a one-sided thing.
I don't know what that means.
It means basically the industry had its say and the townspeople were shut out of the process.
Well, I just reject that. There were public meetings. But if it needs to be changed, the possibility is there.
I think it's very unlikely that we would get it right in 2 revisions. In other towns, tens of revisions. I had talked to you, to figure it too.
Anyone else? Come on down.
Hi, Elizabeth Fitzgibbon, 96 Hilltop Drive.
You're very responsible.
I'm sorry, I'll speak up.
That's why I asked her.
I'll speak
I
up.
didn't know she heard you.
So thank you for hearing us tonight.
I understand this is a yes or a no, but I think we've established that there are a lot of people who really would be in favor of something in between, that there's the current policy that is maybe a little bit too loose, and there's the amendments that are maybe the harsh that they prohibit any solar on much of the property. But I think what we're seeing under the current policy is that there are a lot of applications coming very quickly, and a lot of them in the same area, that we're not thinking about this in the big picture about how we can do this, spread it out over the town, all of the properties. And so given the option between, going with what we currently have or approving the amendments, I would make the argument that we should approve the amendments so that we can pause and think about that in between. And I love that idea of having some sort of, town meeting workshop where we can come together and think about what that in between. But if we continue as we are right now, it may be too late, that much of the property will be developed and we won't have a chance. I also think, just in terms of the process, with all of these proposals coming in, going up together, that puts us, the public, in a position of having to come to each and every meeting to make this case over and over again. You've heard it, and you'll have to hear it over and over again. If we make these amendments and kind of make a pause and rethink where we'd like to be in the middle, I have no doubt that the developers will make sure that we get to that point, that they will come back to us again and again until we find a middle ground. So I would, again, be in favor of making these amendments. Thank you.
Hang on. Any questions? Thank you. Did you want to talk?
Mark Roderick, 73 West Passage Drive. I'm going to spare you what I wrote about how much I'm invested in the town by being a lifelong resident. That I bought additional property, farmland, not being a farmer, and not being wealthy. Because I believe in the character of the town. And I'm just really fearful that it's slipping away of the Navy. And I did want to comment on what you said about that. If you have bigger setbacks, that you eliminate a lot of solar farms because it's not valuable for them to do it in smaller scale. So you have these companies that can only do these projects with big scales. And if you ask for a bigger setback, they might not do it. And that's not really a bad thing. What that tells me is that our town can't support a lot of big solar farms. They're coming at you, doors open. We have welcome on our ordinance. If I was a solar company, I'd be thinking about coming here with farmland. I own a small piece of farmland. I am called constantly by solar farms, by cell phone towers, asking me if I want to put it in. They know that Louis Escobar is $400 that he pays me to farm it. He can't compete with what they would offer me. I'm not the only person like this. And a lot of people might not have the choice if they can back off and say, I don't want it here. But if you make it so easy, everybody that's offering is going to be tempted even more. And like I said, if the limit is 50 feet from my fence to that solar farm, do I want to stay there? What's the message that you send people that own a little bit of land? This is your option for your land. I think that there should be more value to it. I think that for the history of Portsmouth, for the people that have invested here, I think that there should be more value than just saying, let the solar company come right up to your back door, because they might not do it here if you don't let them. So, like I said, I wrote something that I worked on for a week, but I'm just telling you like it is.
No.
Thank you.
Nobody's trying to cut you.
Thank you.
You wait a minute. Wait. Oh, you might have a question. Question? Anybody? All right,
You could email that to us. Read it.
Pardon me?
You could
we
email that
get
to us.
letters, you could send it to us.
Yeah.
Send it to the planning board office, Mr. Lizinski. If you go to the town website.
Well, it says planning board, so I thought you were planning future Portsmouth, so.
Yeah, we
I
are,
wrote
but-
it like that, but now I know that I'm supposed to go back to the town council. And I've been bouncing back and forth for about 2 years with this. It gets really tiring. I don't know how you do it. I give you credit for actually sitting up there. But
And the other thing is,
yeah, well, I know the comprehensive plan is good if you're trying to fall asleep.
oh,
I really read
that
it.
took years and years and years of special meetings.
Well, I
And now
read
it's
it.
been, and now it's been sitting up in the state, upstate, for what, a year and a half? At least a year and a half. Pandemic. So now we can sit and wait.
Well, I read it and I don't see how a solar farm fits into it.
Well,
I'm a little confused
Speak for
about
both.
the rural vistas of Portsmouth being preserved and being protected. I'm a little confused. Even though I did read it slowly over and over again.
you missed the part about the section that deals with solar.
Oh, I think I missed the part about that the developer has all the right
No,
and the residents, like, they just need to be quiet and like let it happen.
are you being quiet?
I'm not being quiet,
And nobody
but,
asked you to.
but I have had to go to several meetings that were bumped around to get here
And
to talk.
unfortunately, on these kinds of issues, you do have to come to public.
I know, I do.
So Chair, could I ask a question?
Sure.
So would you be opposed to solar on that parcel if it was properly screened? And I know a lot of people have mentioned seeing the glass, seeing the metal. Couldn't see it. In other words, if it was an evergreen buffer, tall trees that completely obscured it from view, would you still be opposed to it?
I'm concerned about the wildlife, but I understand that that's of no value to anybody.
That wasn't my question.
That owns
I
property.
wasn't asking. I was asking about.
The buffer, I have a 50-foot buffer. I have a panoramic view. I'm up high and I'm looking. It's also very wide. It's acres and acres. So I can't just plant trees to hide it.
Well, you wouldn't be planting the trees. It would be the developer that was developing. the farm.
I don't think that 50 feet is going to do it. And I think that a buffer that was bigger, that would protect it.
We can actually require the developer to provide a shed analysis where it would show the view from your property, basically, with the trees. I'm not sure if it's gonna help or not, I'm just trying to.
No, it would definitely set my mind at ease. When I sit, when I wash my dishes and I look out there,
I understand.
all I think of is those trees are all coming down and there's going to be a solar field. I'm luckier than a lot of my neighbors who are right up on it. And I really do, I'm really happy that they got bigger setbacks. But for them to say that 50 feet is enough, I just don't think 50 feet is enough for anybody.
I'd like to actually ask Mr. Something.
The answer is that you have a buffer that people can't beat. Cuts back big time on complaints.
Yes.
The reason why I know this is because I used to work for the handle complaints. I used to be on the road. And the facilities that had coniferous trees along the edges with a berm and everything.
I think that we're.
Generally got fewer.
We looked at one last time that had a berm, which elevated everything higher, so that even in the beginning, when you've got the immature trees, it would at least create site barriers. Is something that probably should.
You know, the cliche, they can't see it. It's not there. Out of sight, out of mind. That works.
So I think sort of everyone's concern, well, at least your two concerns is that you're gonna have to look at this in the winter when all the trucks.
Well, that's certainly one concern.
It is.
I would say if that Navy one had a black fence that along the road, because that Navy one was sunk down below. If you look at the top of that fence, if you couldn't see through there, you would never see it. And 99% of heartburn in this room wouldn't be there based on every time you drive by and you grid. I know I grid my team every time we go by there and all that stuff. So, but unfortunately, that's Navy property. And we have no say.
Well, I agree with you on that, because it's like a constant reminder that, you know, the solar farms will look bad, and it's kind of like that. Because let's face it, the Navy one is really, really ugly. It's hideous to look at.
I mean, I think that if enforcement decides that this is what they want and that they have to go in, I think the setback is the key. The setback really is the key. And 50 feet for anyone is just not, it's just not enough. It's not. It's-
But I don't believe in all cases, like 50 feet is not enough when you might have a fence and then the land goes up. But you can't get trees and fences high enough. It can't be a set rule. I think, like it says, that in residential large ones can apply, but there is restrictions. People have certain things. If there is that you can't hide it, whether it's 50 feet or 200 feet, I personally don't think it's the right place. But
I think it has to be in the ordinance, though. It has to be in there because if it isn't, then they're going to say, well, we've done what the ordinance has required. And I just think that they're going to be able to slide in if the ordinance doesn't really put it in there. You know, I just don't think that they're not going to be willing to give up even an inch because all that means to them is money. You know, to me, that's my home, but to them, they're giving up some money and they're going home and they're leaving you to look at it. So I think that, you know, I do ask that if you could possibly, you know, make some recommendations, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Come on down, sir. You know the drill, right?
It's Louis Latenbrook, 94 Sweet Farm Road, Portsmouth. I've listened to a lot of my neighbors tonight speak to the same things that I would agree to. That we've kind of listened to this for a long time now with the ordinance being kicked off. It got bounced around a little bit because it wasn't done in a certain fashion. But we keep kind of pushing it down the road. But tonight we seem to make a little progress where we're getting through a little bit more. I guess my question is, where do we go from here? And where does this feedback go that all of my neighbors have tried to give to the town? And I look at you as part of my neighbors, and you look at it too. You probably moved here for the same reasons that I did. And I know some of your families. Like I said, these are all my neighbors here. And we want the right things to happen here. We're going to grow. We probably don't want things to grow. We probably don't want 7,500 solar panels in our backyard. So they're going to probably show up there. But can we talk about a buffer that's maybe more than 50 feet? Can we talk about runoff? That's going to go down the hills, but it's going to end up in the backyards that we listen to during the meetings. But it seems like the council and the planning board are playing ping pong. And I think we'll stick my finger in his face because I wouldn't want to do your job. I really would, and I probably have the time to do it. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask you because you're the big guy. And I just mean that.
In every sense of the word.
Yeah, well, I don't mean it that way, but where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I've said before, there's going to be a recommendation one way or another. And then it ends up on the desk of the council. I don't know what's going to happen here. There's no clear end result here. And that's where, if you want a moratorium, I think somebody's got to put that on the agenda. Make sure, I think that you're going to recommend, I don't know, I would recommend, I don't know, that there be some kind of a workshop where you bring in all the stakeholders, kind of chew through some of these things, you can come some of the ground, and then those changes will go through the process again. It will come back to the planning board, send it back to the town council. But that would be general.
I think that's why everybody's petrified, because they're thinking that this thing's just gonna go through. I know the one that's next to us out behind the cities. And I heard the one down off my weekend. Oh, that's a scary one too, but I think just people are just afraid because they're not informed. I just think there needs to be more clarity.
Yeah, and again, we don't know the nitty gritty details.
That's the devil. Danielle Abbott had kicked something off where she was going to ask for 200-foot buffer.
That's in the proposal.
Okay, so where is that at?
That's what we're gonna decide tonight.
I see. So you're gonna decide that tonight?
Well, we're gonna make a recommendation,
Okay,
or not.
okay. Any questions for me?
You do have to review that.
I just like to address the stormwater concern. So all those developments are basically required to have, zero runoff, all that stormwater system. So that's designed by a professional engineer. That's they present that. in that plan. That's kind of out of our hands, we're basically relying on.
I'll tell you what, so that project that's falling down to the right, West Passage, at least the developer there, I went down, I met with some of the neighbors. He was nice enough to speak to everybody. And that was nice to hear that. Listen, we haven't talked to anybody next door to us, in a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
We have one on, two.
No problem.
You got one? Let's hear it, let's hear it. There only one other minute.
Shelley Nichols, if you could identify yourself and your address for the record.
Shelley Nicholas, 59 Mariel Rose Drive. Thank you so much for keeping the Zoom option tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be our last one.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
No, we're transitioning. Hopefully it's the last one. If something goes bad, we'll be back in our homes.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again. So I just wanted to echo the sentiments of so many residents who've already spoken regarding requested amendments to the solar ordinance in terms of zoning, setbacks, and buffering. And at this time, I just respectfully request a moratorium on reviewing solar applications until the ordinance amendments have been set in place. And if you don't vote to approve the amendments as is, then I would, again, please request that you advise council on how to properly move forward with amending the ordinance in an effective and expeditious manner. Thank you.
We cannot declare a moratorium. That is beyond our power.
Can you advise on that?
And make recommendations to the town council.
Can you continue to push application continuances month to month until the ordinance is amended?
If there's a legitimate issue, we should continue.
Seems reasonable that there's significant concern among residents about the ordinances. You've heard why. And it just doesn't sound right to approve these flurry of applications under an ordinance that people are unhappy with.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Do you have any questions? Do you have anybody else, Mike? Anyone else wish to speak? Well, that's right.
That's right. Always two for me.
Yeah, you never go away.
And speaking, so Christian Sullivan, 799 Union Street. It's my last question, I promise, guys. It's not a matter of when, but it's a matter of if. And we've spoken a lot here about what we're going to try to do to move council in the right direction and everything else. But I think would bring a lot of comfort to everyone in this room and a lot of other people that I've spoken with is that the power that you guys have right now. So that case by case thing that we talked about, that's in the ordinance. When a developer, we get to that point and they do not handle it with the same candor and grace that Mr. Chappelle has with his development, are you guys all ready to make that claim against like a large legal firm on that?
Can we move things around and do what's necessary?
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. I think that's really
part of what we do.
just nice to hear.
That's the whole, one of the whole things that people misunderstand about us is that we have the ability to negotiate with the developer. They want X, we want Y. All right, how do we get to where we need to be? And within certain limits, in terms of, yeah, I mean, that's all part of the process, particularly these things. And one other thing, and sits in my craw, and that is one of the earlier participants referred to as a solar farm. That just drives me out.
Being a farm owner, you can only
It
imagine.
is not
It goes
a
right up.
farm. That was a publicity term that somebody thought of to try to make these things more palatable. They are solar facilities.
That's all
They're
better.
more akin to manufacturing than they are anything else. Yeah, I never, and the idea of cutting down trees to put in a solar farm, that's what that was all about. It's just not-
I think
It's just something that ticks me off.
I think the big thing is just because we haven't seen, no one has seen that in use yet. You guys basically saying, hey, you know what, we don't think this is right, and this is why, especially up against the larger.
And I think I said earlier that if I were in your shoes, I'd probably be you guys are. But they're going to be somewhere, someplace, sometime. And the idea is to try to do it in a way that makes sense.
It's just nice to know we're in it together, that's all.
No, and I understand the angst and the concern that everybody had.
I think once we see, that we're on the same team on one of these, where you guys actually say, hey, look, this is, this is why, and that's why, I think just, people will start to change, but.
You have to deal with specifics.
Okay. Awesome, thank you.
Anybody have any questions? All right. Hearing none, I'll close the. Mr. Chappelle, of course, we have another hour.
Put your ballet in its way. I'm sorry. Not being only I am an attorney who handles cases. So, and one of those cases was a case for a solar farm up like that. Right? There was no solar, not in our town, in any town. There was no solar didn't exist when most of the came in place. So we have the top solar farm. Nobody complains about it. It's in the right spot. In fact, most of us didn't even know it existed for 20 years. You can't see it, can't smell it, can't
Can
hear
you
it.
address us?
That was
Be nice.
I don't. I haven't got as much criticism from you. It's personal. But we didn't have, so if I put my back to it, but we didn't have that zoning ordinance because our zoning ordinance, as every zoning ordinance, just allowed us to say, hey, for those things that aren't invented yet, and those things that aren't specific, look what's close, draw an analogy and do it. That's how the Cox Cable one got approved. That's how Chase Farm got approved. That, and nobody seems to be complaining about this. When the Superior Court said there is a moratorium on solar in Portsmouth because you don't have an ordinance. And when the state of Rhode Island gave a model ordinance, and the governor said, we want everybody to statewide to have a little continuity, so there's going to be a model ordinance. I had a particular client who said, when can we get in the game? Not when can I guarantee to have a solar farm in Portsmouth. When can I, like any other person that owns land, ask to read a zoning book and say, do I meet this criteria so that I can request the use of this land? I said, you can't do it until we have a solar ordinance. And we went to the town and they were waiting for the model ordinance. And it was the opinion to hire me to move the process along. It's not my ordinance. It wasn't written for me in my land. It was a taking of the model ordinance provided by the state. You know, because I gave you each a digital handbook with the model ordinance, every printout on how the model ordinance came to be, and researched the 16 other towns that had put together a solar ordinance, gave you a copy of every one of them. We then went to the council, not during COVID, a year before COVID, and we asked to get on the agenda to put forth an ordinance. It got referred like every ordinance. If you want to put an ordinance for a strip club, it gets referred to the planning board and our zoning and planning department. I have countless hours meeting with Gary Crosby, Mike Asciola, comparing the ordinance, picking and choosing, and then we came to you for 3 or 4 successive meetings. All advertised, all pre-COVID, all done very publicly and not under the cloak of darkness. The only thing that happened is we were on for April 5th, I believe it was, and the world shut down. And I got a notice to say, come on May 11th. When I went on May 11th, the town council approved the ordinance. But there was no meeting on April 5th at the town council to continue to April 11th.
and I think it was Mr. Crossman pointed out, you need to advertise 3 weeks in advance. And I was told, and the client was told, you know that ordinance that Chappelle got for you, or got through with all the town's approvals, we're gonna do it again. And it was done again at the recommendation of the town, out of abundance of caution, give everybody a second chance. Back, this was November, and we listened to gross smart letters. We listened to all of these nice people in West Passage say a lot of what they've said tonight. And we listened to, we had the appraisal report about 7%, and we were prepared and had arranged against it. And everybody voted, and the ordinance was approved. I did not write an ordinance intentionally that allowed people to walk into town in a residential area, and they can't. You need a special use permit and you need permission of the planning. You need to do both. The reason you need to come to the planning board is because we wanted to make sure in that ordinance that they were all done the right way. And the planning board, I've always said, does a lot of the physical layout. Zoning board is pretty good with dealing with neighbors, listening to complaints and trying to figure out what fits in what zone. But we need drainage calculations, normally the purview of the planning board. When there's a box store that comes in town, it's a zoning board approval, but it all gets kicked to you to do all that physical layout, fire department, structural, all the things that we need. This ordinance is not carte blanche. I'm just, and because it's going to go over some of your things, I'm just going to get the sections that everybody talks about. A, general siting. Solar energy systems shall be located, constructed, installed, and operated to minimize potentially adverse impacts to nearby properties, natural resources. I'm guessing that's your water supply. And or individuals. Impacts to be minimized include, but are not limited to, those locations and habitats for animals, including birds and plant species of concern and habit forest fragmentation. I'm going to tell you this, I've been zoning for 35 years. That language does not exist if I want to build a power plant, a nuclear power plant. It doesn't exist if I want to build a Budweiser brewery. It doesn't exist if I want to build a bank or a residential neighborhood. Solar energy is more restricted than any use in the history of Portsmouth by 40-fold. Go to paragraph D, land clearing. Wherever practical, clearing of natural vegetation shall be limited to what is necessary for construction, operate, and maintenance of the solar system or otherwise prescribed by applicable laws, regulations, or ordinance. The disturbance or removal of topsoil is regulated. The utilized existing cleared land minimizes the impact on forest and habitats. When Clemens Market comes in, and I love Clemens Market, but you take down every bush, every tree, it's a giant parking lot, you put a couple landscapes. No other use of land says use the minimal amount you can for what you're doing and the rest of it preserved. It is more regulated than everything else. Now let's look at the infamous 50 feet. Buffer areas and screening, it is 50 feet. That is a minimum. Natural vegetation or additional landscape screening shall be provided, not may, shall be provided as determined by the zoning board of review, if it's a special use permit, or the planning board, depending on the existing land use on the site and the adequacy of the site's natural vegetation or lack thereof to mitigate impacts to public views, scenic roads, and abutters. The zoning board or planning board shall have the authority to set site-specific width of buffers. Does not say limited to 50 feet. It says you shall have the authority to do that. Heights of plants at planting, and to require an opaque screen to adjacent properties and or public roads. If required by the zoning board or planning board, the landscape plan shall be prepared by a registered landscape architect. Again, whether that's enough is whether you all do your jobs after listening to some pretty incredible people coming up and telling you what they want and what they need. You get to decide whether 50 feet in that area through things that, like a site study, through things like pictures, whether 50 feet is adequate, and it can't be less than that. But it can be unlimited. It doesn't say less than 50, no more than 200. It says what you specifically need to satisfy yourself that there is a reasonable balance between the developer's rights of any type of project and the abutters or other people's right not to see what's going on next door. There's no site like that. You can't go to the zoning board and say, I want you to move Clemens 200 feet from the property line. This is really more anti-development because of the state model, not because of me, because of the works of Gary Crosby, because of the works of Mike Asciola and all of you. This is, you adopted a fairly consistent, very restrictive, in the words of zoning. And again, I remind you, that you have to kind of start with every time we decide what goes in a specific area around town, we have to decide and measure its degree of obnoxiousness, quite frankly. A residence, we can have a residence. An industry, we can have a factory. Where does the solar fit in? And I get that it's manufacturing, but it doesn't generally have the traffic. It doesn't have the noise, doesn't have the smell, and it doesn't have the odor. So there are reasonable people on the planet that would rather have it next door to me than 70 houses. And in some cases, you get to decide whether that's a reasonable thing that the developer wants and it fits in that neighborhood. And in some cases, you get to decide that it may not. And I agree with what was said. You may say 200-foot buffer in this particular area, and yet the 50-foot minimum is okay in there. And if that 200-foot buffer makes it economically impossible for the developer to go forward, then I guess that's just as good as throwing it out. But we all know that you have, or I know that you have Gary Crosby's letter that kind of goes item by item. I do say that a workshop might be fine to look at some things on an item by item basis, but collectively, what was before you eliminates. He went through town and said, here is every lot that is big enough to do it. Let's apply the 200 feet. Let's apply the lot coverage. Let's apply what Ms. Abbott proposed, which is exactly what you saw from the Grossmark letter that we already reviewed. Because remember, it was sent back to us after the fact to do that once already. If you do that, you eliminate those sites. One thing at the end of his letter says, I don't know what it does to the West Shore site. Court knows what it does to the West Shore site. That's the site we have after the fact that we acquired and tried to do this on. When you take 2,000 foot of frontage on West Shore Road and take a 200-foot buffer, 2,000 times 200 is 400,000 square feet. 10 acres that you take out of a 30-acre piece. You do that on all four sides. You then have areas of the pad that you can't, areas of the pad that everybody says you don't want to cut trees down and put things on. A lot of that is within 200 feet. You can't put solar there, so it forces you to use areas that you're preserving 500 feet by the water and intentionally not cutting down trees. You can't use blanket rules of 200 feet. They eliminate. It takes my 30-acre piece and limits it to 3.5 acres of development and eliminates 2.5 acres of cement pad where they should be and would put them in an area where you cut down trees. So one size doesn't fit all, but your brains have a right to read this ordinance and say, in this particular boundary, on this particular proposal, 50 feet is enough. On this particular proposal, it's not. Whether we had to decide, both this council and this planning board, on whether to blanket say no residential. And I know we're here saying this is about it being in residential, but let's look at the 4 that are proposed. One's in heavy industry, one's in light industry, one's in commercial, and the least controversial of the other 3 at least is one that's proposed in residential. It's one that is bordered on West Main Road on one side, a swamp on the other side, and generally has a couple of neighbors. We also have the old dump, which is half commercial and half R10. Under Grossmart, that is one of the best places in town for solar if they go, because it is a reclaimed brownfield. If you blanket say no residential, you're going to eliminate some sites that are better. Some of the sites that it may be short-sighted to say all light industry sites should be a matter of right, because the light industry sites, quite frankly, seem to be sites that may not be as fit for this as some residential that is more obscure and not as covered. There's no way in town you can say, we always regulate the piece of property that we have. So we're regulating the light industry piece. We don't generally regulate anywhere else in the ordinance that it matters what you abut. There are no heavy industrial lots in the town of Portsmouth that don't abut residential. There are no commercial lots that don't abut residential. There are no light industry lots except for the industrial park that has just a couple of the middle lots that don't abut residential. Everything in the town of Portsmouth abuts residential. And the zoning is for the lot, not necessarily for the residential abutters. But this ordinance specifically says, if you do abut residential abutters, give them more of a setback and give the boards. So again, I think the ordinance as it stands allows you to do it. I also know that you know that the four that are currently before the board are grandfathered. Quite frankly, and I don't think this is a test and we're making mistakes, but you're going to have the opportunity to see the loopholes in an ordinance or the mistakes that are made in an ordinance with these four. That's the day you should be asking for recommendations of what needs to be done. That's the day when you say, you know, it shouldn't read this way, it should read that way. But has anything come before you yet? I don't think there's been any detail on any of the projects yet, quite frankly, that all need. And Christian, master plan approval comes before preliminary. That's a state law. That is ridiculous use of the English language. It always has been a ridiculous use of the English language that preliminary doesn't come before master. But that's just these guys aren't using the wrong terms due to the terms we were all given from the state. When they come to that level, I think you'll be able to apply the order and strike that very balance that you're looking for. I don't think the balance comes from compromising and saying, well, I say 50 feet, you say 200 feet, let's just pick 125. I think that's too much for some and too little for others. So I think the compromise comes on the case-by-case analysis. And if you've heard anything, you've heard there's going to be a room full of people on a case-by-case analysis to let you know what their opinion is and to let you know what you should be doing as the keeper of the ordinance. So I'm hoping you leave it stand pat, and I believe it will, in fact, pass the test of time. I don't believe there is a rush on the ordinance. I believe there was a 3-year waiting list waiting for the ordinance to come into play. That created the same 4 people we've been dealing with since 2018. Sorry again.
I got a question. There's statements that those four are already grandfathered in. And I saw
Well,
I split or they're not approved yet.
they are not grandfathered in as
They're
approved.
under this ordinance.
They are only grandfathered in to say that if you change the ordinance to a mandatory 200 feet, as opposed to just making them go 200 feet. And I've read some of we've all seen the master plans. In many cases, the developers have proposed substantially more distances than 50 feet, knowing that there are areas like that. Certainly you saw that in mine, but I know I've seen that in some of the other businesses as well. Grandfather just means which ordinance they get to ask you to approve under.
Which they operate on.
Which they operate on.
But so that when they come to the next level, just that these nice people have the opportunity to give their opinion, we can, at our disposal, say that, well, maybe on these 3 sides, the 50 feet work, but this side here, in our opinion, it needs to be 100, needs to be 200 feet. That is something we still have the power to.
First of all, I think that's crystal clear you have the power to do it. And I also know that that was discussed specifically by you all when you recommended this
It's really asked that
stuff.
question.
I know. And I'm answering for them. And at the town council, they could pull my quotes if they pull the meetings where I represented that you absolutely had that power. I'm not here trying to pitch any of these in an area that is all that controversial. If I was and said, I don't know what you're doing, minimum 50 feet, that's all we have to do, which we can in other ordinances, you know. You don't have necessarily a right to do anything but the minimum in other ordinances. It's not a minimum, it's just a stated amount. In this particular case, all the representations to the council have been that you have that power. All the representations to you have been that you have that power. And I have opinion on how, quite frankly, that might surprise the people in the room, how I'd vote if I was sitting in your chair on some of these on that. That doesn't, personal text that is developer friendly. This is not the case. This is for all purposes, the model ordinance with safeguards.
We'll finish with them and then you can come up. Anybody else have any questions on the board? All right, come on up, sir.
Dave Howard, 36 Burial Rose Drive. My question related to what Mr. Bell said was if the ordinance has enough teeth to stop adverse development in areas where, for example, environmental issues come into play. Why haven't I heard of any of the boards I've attended, anybody ask the developers why they have to cut down forests to make their rates?
Want to address it? Or I can.
Well, I think we're both going to say the same thing. When we come, even though master plan approval sounds like it's an approval, when you come to preliminary, now you are saying, here's where it is, here's how many trees are going down, here's a neighbor that found the spotted frog, here's all of the things, here's how close it is now to the water department, here's a statement saying surface water runoff, here's a statement from the water department saying it is or it isn't. That's the time to hash all this out. And they have never been given the opportunity to do that because it hasn't got there. All the debate now is just whether they have the tools to. And I still stand by the fact that they do.
So these developers are paying all these engineering development firms all this money to develop their plans. And they still might not be approved.
The nature of the development. In other words, they say, we want to do this on this board. We have the ability to say, no, you can't do that. You got to push that this way. You got to push that this way.
You have the
The concept of putting in a solar facility has been approved if they get master plan approved. The nitty gritty details of where and how and what is not yet set. But they report now from that master, because they sit and listen to the master, and they sit and listen to these meetings. And then they report back to their client and their lawyer on what they're gonna propose. So it's not a trade secret. If I was in one of these projects, I would be giving my client a certain set of advice. If I was in another one, after master plan approval, there's a decision after master plan approval, huddle up. What is the concept? What's the reading of the room on how we're doing? What do we clearly have to address? I guarantee there's no developer that left this room that doesn't know they have to address the setbacks and the vegetated buffer and come with a landscape architect and pictures and drawings going, here's what you're gonna see, can you live with it? And it's prepared to negotiate.
I agree with you on that point. Where I don't think I agree is if there's wholesale deforestation, why isn't that brought up earlier in the board review process?
Go ahead.
Mr. Howard, I appreciate your passion. I had a sidebar afterwards. I understand exactly where you're coming from. There is no ordinance in town right now that prohibits any current landowner from clear cutting their land. They could just go out and cut down every tree on it. There's nothing that can
I
stop them.
understand that, and I appreciate that. ordinance apparently says that we should be trying to preserve forests.
I agree with you, but before an ordinance, before somebody that comes to us with solar plans, they're free to go and clear cut their property. There's nothing that stops them. We at least now have some teeth in this ordinance. When it does get announced, we can help manage the forest clearing, et cetera, and the buffer. But currently, they can clear cut right up to the edge of your property, and there's nothing that can stop. There's no ordinance.
You don't need approval.
They don't need approval. Zippo.
Mr. Carter, one of the nice things about the solar is they generally don't own the land. If they own the land, you would clear cut it first before you came here, so you wouldn't have to do. Exactly what they'll do. Right, and that's what I would. They don't own my land. I own my land. They cut a tree down unless I know what is going to happen. So there's some built-in kind of protection for the community that now you can pass an ordinance that says anybody who cuts their land down in 2 years, within 2 years is eligible for solar, I suppose. But for the most part, because we own the land, no one's cutting anything until we know exactly what is approved and what happens. Or much less likely to happen if the solar company owns the land. And right now, I don't know any solar company for all this. All right, anything else? All right, I'm gonna close the participation, and we are going to take a 5-minute break. I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
You all set, Mike? All right, we have in front of us a request for advisory opinion to the town council regarding a proposed amendment to the ordinance. Everybody's had a chance to look at the ordinance, listen to the members of the public in terms of what they have to say about it. Let's decide what we're going to do. What's the pleasure of the board?
So I'm not gonna make a motion, but I am. I read the memo and I concur with what they say. Paragraph. And their recommendation.
Talking about the letter of May 5.
That's correct. So recommend the bid. I respect planning department and the hard work they put into this ordinance, and I would not be making a motion or even any motion that changes.
Mr. Chair, yes, I agree with Mr. Lopes. I think we definitely heard that there's a lot of concern about setbacks, so I feel like the best thing is the recommendation to the town council. Workshop or some sort of public event to hash out these 5 proposed changes and kind of come to some common ground as to what's the best way to accommodate solar development, water rights, landowner rights, water rights, going forward with that. And it's hard to make a recommendation, wholesale on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but maybe I agree with, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but I don't necessarily agree with number 5. Setback, I don't necessarily agree with 50-foot minimum setback either. So maybe there's some sort of common ground in there that needs to be, kind of hashed out a little more.
Like, exactly what he said.
I just read several segments of what's in here. I cannot support those changes. I do like the idea of recommendation of some kind of a workshop or some mechanism for getting the stakeholders in these things, taking another look or another crack at some of these things. And I would be more than willing to entertain some things that I think across the board. It's just takes too many pieces of property off. We go from 30, mid-30s to 5 potential things. I think that's way too much. And there are a couple of other things like that. And the planning board memo stuff that's part of my. But we still need a month. Unless we have something. Still need a month.
So we can make a motion to invite the town council to keep the amendments on the table until we can have a second workshop. Or is there a first workshop?
It's not our workshop, we have to be there.
Recommend they have a workshop to propose amendments and get feedback from them.
We have an attorney to tell us all about it.
Well, the process requires the council to hold a hearing on the proposed amendments.
Right.
Depending on what happens there, we always have to work.
Right, but we can make a recommendation that a workshop be held and all the stakeholders be given an opportunity.
Right, but not just the plans that are required.
No, we can't require them to do anything.
No, but I mean, they have to have a public hearing with the statute, but the ordinance on these proposed amendments. That's the next step after receiving the planning board's recommendation.
Okay.
Just want to clarify that.
Typically, the workshop would be held with the planning. But so that land use.
I can't wait.
I mean,
But the process on these proposed amendments has to take its course. And
Right, they have to deal with the proposal first. So somebody has to make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we do not go forward with
Don't recommend.
I do not recommend. And that I recommend. Now, there's a lot of things that this just should all make perfectly clear. It's clear to a lot of us up to me and specific uses. There's specific things that we have the right to do that. That's why I think that some of the things I just can't accept their stomach, so. I want to not accept.
Making a motion.
I am making a motion to not accept.
Do not recommend.
Yeah, do not recommend.
So we're just amendments. And that's it.
Right.
You're going to add a workshop?
Yes, and then I would strongly recommend ask for a workshop and let everybody have their voices and clear these things up. A lot of people haven't heard, like, all read it and made clear. And once that's done, I'm glad to hope what comes out of that.
Big vote.
Yeah.
Big word. Yes. Is there a second?
Should that part of the same motion or something?
Really, the council by statute, by zoning ordinance, is required to now hold the hearing on your on the proposal, they consider your recommendation.
Correct.
You can inject a workshop.
All right, so
So the hearing is the workshop.
Okay, then if you, depending on what happens, consider changes in the future, or have a workshop.
yeah, but we recommend a workshop.
Now,
They can do anything they want with it.
When there's a proposed amendment process triggered under the Enabling Act and under the ordinance, there's a time frame supposed to actually have this hearing within 65 days. And it's all set out, it's step to step. This is one of the steps. The next step will be public hearing.
So if we vote against adopting the changes, it automatically will on the workshop.
No, it'll be a public hearing on the proposed amendments that you're voting on.
Right, but they're stuck with the same
I mean,
situation.
the planning board has authority at any time to decide it wants to further study the ordinance, but without the clock ticking on a proposed amendment, just to have workshops or consider, get stakeholders together and consider that. But it's not part of this process that we're in right now.
So is it that we can vote against accepting it as it is? Don't even bother telling the town council, we make an amendment to have our own workshop, don't include the town council. And then the next time we have that hearing, we send what that information and all.
Planning board could
Invite,
propose that.
we can invite the town council to sit there and listen to everybody here.
The planning board has authority to, on its own, to study the issue further and propose amendments to the ordinance at the planning board. And that would start the process, except it doesn't get back to the planning board and recommend what it had already proposed. I just think that workshop part should be kept separate.
All right, let's put it on the agenda for the next planning board.
I guess I'm against that too, because we gotta let this thing run its course with the council before we do any changes. I mean, they're gonna have a public hearing. They could potentially change the ordinances in front of them.
They could adopt the proposal.
Anyway, there's no
Contrary to your,
This is just a recommendation.
All it is.
I get a motion that we don't accept the changes.
You're not approved the.
Yes, we don't accept the suggested changes.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We have one more agenda item that deals with our monthly projected status report. Is there a motion on that document? We received. For a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody's opposed. Okay, we needed a motion to adjourn. So
We
moved.
don't have
Who's going to second the motion?
Second.
All right, we're out of here.
Yeah.